There's more than a woman in Wisconsin who's been a Latina activist.
In growing up around my mother, who was one of the founders of United Migrant Opportunity Services,
I was pretty young. I worked for the Latin American Union for Civil Rights.
That is strong. I mean, I would label myself more of an educator than an activist.
Well, I'd have to be my mother. She was one of the first women to speak English, to read and write in both languages, to drive a car.
I would define an activist someone who has the heart to want to be part of their community, to want to make changes, and don't ask for a penny for it.
Somos Latinas is the starting point of the important recovery and documentation of Latinx history in this state. I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My father's from Guadalajara. I don't know Mexico, I know Wisconsin.
The idea of a book was because in addition to creating public awareness, we wanted to reach other older Latina community activists in Wisconsin.
We left Cuba in 1965. We actually left 6 years after the revolution. At that point, there was a strong Soviet influence, so that's when my father said, we're leaving. At that point, the freedom flights from Cuba to Miami had been suspended. So we ended up going through Spain, waiting in Spain to be able to enter the United States and get our visa. So once we came to the United States, we went to live on the U.S. Naval Base on Cuba.
This story, as I'm sure you are aware, is not my whole life story. I have pieces of my life in the book. One piece in particular that I'm real proud of was my involvement in the union, the labor movement.
The part that I would like to share with you today was actually when I was Maria Flores. At that time, in 1982, a new Senate district had been carved out of the south side of Milwaukee.
The piece I'm going to focus in is on the establishing of the Latinas en Acción. So back in around 2000, I joined the Women's Fund of Greater Milwaukee. And a couple of years into working with them, Cecilia Vallejos and I decided that we wanted to create our own fund.
It was important for us to be able to elect an Hispanic candidate. And there was an opportunity presented after the 1990 census.
Why the women did what they did, what they were, and how that affected their lives. Motivation, role models, what risks were involved in taking on the community building efforts.
And there are phenomenal women and men and elders whose stories are not part of much Latino history, much less Wisconsin history.
No one had ever run for a Senate seat, a Latino, ever. A group of us got together and we discussed the matter, and we concurred that a Latino needed to vote for that seat. Much to my surprise, my friends turned to me and said, "You ought to be the one."
I felt it was the time that we needed to increase Latino representation. I decided that we needed to get together and we needed to show our strength. And in doing so, we needed to become educated about the redistricting process, which went on at 3 different levels, at the city, at the state, and at the county.
I grew up mostly in the Virgin Islands. I spent my teen years living there. And then I wanted to go to school in the States. I wanted to see what the United States was like. So I applied for a high school, a boarding school in Massachusetts. I spent time in Massachusetts working as a teacher for a center for pregnant and parenting teens. As a teacher, they called me maestra, which was a significant title for me, and I never realized how powerful it was and how creative I could be in that job.
I did many things, including march with Cesar Chavez. I got our county's executive to issue a proclamation in support of grape boycott, which was going on at that time.
And we had worked on social issues and women organizing around different issues. We've been able to raise approximately $70,000, and we've gifted over half of that to small projects directed at young girls and women.
Perhaps they chose me because I was at that time a Latina with educational credentials. We believed that this type of candidate would appeal to an overall community, overall voters in that region.
From Massachusetts, I ended up accepting a position in Wisconsin as director for Centro Hispano at a time when the Latino community was exploding, and people didn't really understand this explosion, didn't understand where people were coming from, didn't understand their journey and their challenges. So I spent a lot of time in that role trying to educate government officials, school districts, etc., about what Latino immigrants were facing in coming to Wisconsin.
We reached out to the African American community and we shared with them what our plan was, and they shared with us what they had. So we had to make sure that we weren't in an opposition, and we reached a consensus to support each other's position, so we provided a united front.
I still continue as much as I can, even though there was no union there. I have always believed that unionism is not just the rank and file. Unionism is the whole community as a whole. All the working people, we are all a union.
So our campaign was a quick campaign. We did not win, but most importantly, the coming together of these men and women in this campaign energized and indeed coalesced the Latino vote in the South Side.
One of the most powerful moments in 2006 in Madison was the immigration rally in support of immigrants. And there were busloads coming from all over Wisconsin. It was powerful to feel that energy, and it was great to receive just incredible support from everybody about being an immigrant.
You know, why I think that's as important is really about, letting other people know, letting the community know who we are, what our value is as Latinas, and that we have that value.
I feel honored that I've been a conduit, and I don't see me more than anything but a conduit. It's their voice, their stories. I just give it a channel to be funneled into. I don't use the word empower. I don't empower anyone. They've had it all along, and they've used it, but institutions haven't listened to them. And so I see that in some way we open a channel for these voices that have been speaking for many years, decades, about things that need to be corrected. And they've achieved great things.
And I think that we really have contributed to the larger understanding of what community building is.